Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
With Simon Pitton-Jones' second talk, so I don't really have to introduce you now. I've already done that. Thanks a lot for coming back and giving your second talk on how to give a great research talk. Of course, we can put that into context a little bit with what Dave told us this morning and see whether the two of them agree and what we learned from both sessions, or whether there are any conflict points. But Dave will also join us in a minute, so we can have a discussion about some points as well.
Great.
Okay, thank you,
good.
Simon.
And we have to should finish at 4, right? That's when yeah, that's fine. Okay, so this is a controlled experiment in the sense that I was in London this morning, so sadly I was not able to come to Dave's sessions, though I gather they were really good. So you get the chance to sort of see two completely independent views, and you can judge how well they fit together. So same rules of engagement as before. So you on Tuesday you were a great audience, but you didn't just sit there like bread puddings and wait, right? You sort of came back and made comments and asked questions as the talk went along, and that's good, right? So please do that again. I know it's this time, it's not the morning, it's after lunch, and we've been saturated with talks, but nevertheless, do try. Okay, so this bit is about your paper has amazingly been accepted for the conference, and now you get to give your talk. So I'm mainly going to think about the format of a kind of 20 or 30-minute conference talk. There's essentially all the same lessons apply to a kind of 1-hour seminar talk as well in a department somewhere. Mostly then I want to focus on trying to think about why it is that you're giving this talk, because it's awfully easy to be a bit woolly about that, what to put in, and more specifically what to leave out, right? And also I want to give you a reason that you might want to tune into this talk, right? So here it is. Why should you care? Well, so many talks, particularly their presentations, often the paper may be quite good, the presentations are not very exciting. You go along to it's the 8th presentation that day, and somehow it doesn't set your blood racing through your veins, right? So the general standard is, it's not that great, and quite simple things, just like with writing a paper, can make your talk, I think, a lot better. And this is good, right? And moreover, this is not just good for you because people then, like your talk, but it's also good for the world because your ideas are communicated more accurately and in a more exciting way, and moreover, you get the benefit of their feedback. And finally, it's a kind of talks are amazing, right? This is the chance when you have the at least modulo laptops undivided attention of a series of people who might actually be interested in what you have to say. And as I was saying before, this is their most precious commodity, and they're physically in the room with you. So this is the sort of golden opportunity to have some informed dialogue with people. So don't waste it. It's really worth paying attention to this. It's a communication exercise. So back to here. Right? First thing I want to say is a bit about purpose. All right, and in everything that I say, I'm going to speak quite a lot about computer sciencey talks, but anything to do with presentation styles and stuff, you should listen to Dave this morning. Right, my slides are terrible from a sort of typography point of view. I just go for content. So you should listen to Dave for that and outdo me in that respect. So why are you giving this talk? So here are some bad reasons. Right. To impress your audience, right? There you are in front of an audience you would like to impress. You would like to seem very clever, right? And bamboozle them. Somebody told me the other day that on Tuesday that many social science papers are written in this way. Maybe presentations are as well. I can't really believe this, but this would be bad. Nor is it about trying to brain dump everything you know about the topic on your audience. And this does happen, right? People sometimes give talks in which they sort of, they're so excited about their topic, they just tell you everything they know all at once, and that's very indigestible. Right? So you need to be a bit selective. And that comes with not presenting too much technical detail, because that can overwhelm your audience as well. So these are sort of non-goals to present everything or to impress them. Here are some things that I think are goals, right? You want to convey, just like in your paper, but now you've got a captive but perhaps less well-informed and less motivated audience. For a paper, you have an audience that isn't captive, but they're maybe a bit more motivated. The audience in a room here is perhaps a bit less motivated, but they are physically here in the room with you. So you want to give them some idea about what you're talking. You want to convey to them your key idea, right? Just convey some intuition to them, so that even if they leave the talk and they never read the paper and they never see anything else about your talk again, they have taken away something that was valuable to them. So this is the last thing I said, to make them glad they came. Right, and presumably that might mean glad, and it was funny, or it was kind of it was lively presentation. But it would be better if they took away some ideas that they thought, oh, that was kind of interesting. Actually, I might be able to use that, or at least it was intriguing. So it's also a good way to think of it is it's a kind of advertisement for your paper. Right, so often when you're giving a talk, you have a research paper behind it, maybe in the proceedings of the conference, maybe something you're writing at the moment, that has much more detail. And so you could think of a talk as a kind of a lost leader or sort of advertisement that makes people think, oh, I would really like to know more about that. And hallelujah, the author has written a paper about it too, so I can go read the paper. So you want to leave them sort of salivating. It's like, the taster menu. And then they want to go back and get the real thing. Okay. So far so good. So this is why you want to give your talk. So focusing on these things, they kind of seem obvious. And yet when you think about them, when you're writing your talk, they do change the way you give it, I think, and what you put in. Now, your audience, here they are pouring in. Your audience are the audience you would like, were there when you began. They have read all your papers, right? So they've eagerly been following your research progress. Have read each of your papers as they come out. They're following your RSS feed. They're reading your blog posts, and they're just waiting for that next paper, right? And they're very familiar with the technical background, right? They know all about epimorphic bifunctors, and moreover, they are ready, right? It's the morning. They've been for their morning run. They're full of energy, right? This is the audience you want. So what is the audience you get? Right? The opposite in every dimension, right? They're late. They have never heard of you. They have heard of bifunctors, but they kind of wish they hadn't. And moreover, they're kind of dozy, right? Because they've been sitting in a windowless room for 6 hours listening to talks. You're kind of at the end of the day of a research conference, and it's like eating chocolate for the whole day. So they're a bit overwhelmed. All right? So what are you going to do? What's your goal? So your goal is to kind of take this audience and kind of wake them up and make them feel they're glad that they came to that talk, right? And they're taking away something exciting from it. That's it. And that they wish they could read your paper. So this is the sort of overall story, right, about what you're trying to do. And I want to say a little bit about what to put in, what to leave out, and about presentation style to help orient. So starting with what to put in, how you might achieve this goal. So far, so good? Any observations or questions so far? Okay, so here's what I try to put into a talk. A bit of motivation to explain sort of why you might want to listen to the talk, and then a lot about the key idea and pretty much nothing else. In an hour's talk, you might have room for a bit else, but basically for a 20-minute or 30 or 25-minute conference talk, you don't have room for anything else at all. So I want to say a bit more about both of these things. First, motivation. Right, so I figure that when you first, and I believe Dave said this to you this morning, right? What did he call it? The hallowed something? The hallowed ground of cognitive dissonance or something, yes. Well, anyway, the first 2 minutes are important. 90 seconds, okay. Well, we disagree on 30 seconds worth, but so you don't have very long to engage your audience. But I think Dave is right that you do have that moment at the beginning, at which at the beginning of the talk, they do look up. They look up from reading their email or reading their proceedings. They're willing to engage with you, but you have to give them the reason to stay with you in the first 90 seconds. Or 2 minutes, right? So you have to do so quickly. And so these are the questions that are in the back of their mind. They may not be thinking it explicitly, but they are. So what are you going to do? Well, so I tried to give you one example right at the beginning. My second slide was why you should listen to this talk. Right? So I actually wrote that at the top, right? Why you should tune into this talk. And you can do that too, right? You can treat your audience as grown up. Say, I know you're going to read your email in a moment, but I want to tell you why you should hang on and give me a chance here, right? So you can even do it as explicitly as that. But that's a subtext for your first 120 seconds or 90 seconds. So here's a couple of examples, right, of intros that I think might, work quite well, and you can imagine ones that don't, right? So here, what's this? Java class files are large, gives a little bit of data here, and they get sent over networks. Could we use some language-aware compression technology, better than gzip, say, to squish them down so that we could send the same information over using, fewer bits and therefore get them there quicker? Yes, I'm going to show you in this talk how, by using language-aware technology that knows what it's compressing, rather than generic compression technology, I can do sort of 25% better and therefore get the programs running faster. Okay? So you can say that in about 30 seconds. You can give a couple of examples in the next minute, and you're away. See what I mean? So you've given them a little hook. You've given them a bit of data, but you made those claims. Do you remember when we were talking about writing a paper, I was saying make the claims early? Right? This is your making the claim bit in your first couple of minutes, if you can. Here's another example. Concurrent programs. Everybody knows that in concurrent programs, finding synchronization errors is really hard. I'm going to show you a scalable technique that finds a certain class of synchronization errors and does so very robustly. And then you might give an example or two to illustrate what you mean by that. But what you don't want to do is just to give the first 2 minutes of sort of general blather, right, about the general area before you get anywhere near what you're going to tell them. Okay? So it's motivation. So I call it motivation because you want to leave them motivated, right? It's your 2 minutes to make them feel they want to stay with you. Okay, so what did we have? We had motivation and key idea. That's motivation. What about key idea? So this is, you will remember this from Tuesday, right? In your paper, by the time you've finished, you must know the key idea, and you must make sure that you know your readership is absolutely in no doubt about it. And in a talk, it's even more so, and you may have to refine it even more. Paper, you have quite a lot of bits in a paper. You have fewer bits in a talk, so you have to remorselessly tease out what is the one thing you would like your audience to go away with. So sometimes I actually produce a slide, right, that says, this slide has the key idea on it. Or I jump up and down and I say, if you're going to remember nothing else about this talk, remember this slide. Actually, this is the one that I would like you to remember, right? It's all bit self-referential, but nevertheless, it's a good idea to do that with your audience, because then even if they have been reading their email, they think, what is the key idea? It gives them a reason to say, now is the moment to listen. Okay? And another very helpful thing about this is that once you've written that slide, or a little slide sequence that says, here is the key idea, the rest of the talk kind of almost organizes itself by the slides before put you in a position to articulate what the idea is, and the slides after are giving more evidence that the key idea works, or more background, but just more detail to fill it out. That makes sense? But until you know what it is, you can't use it as an organizing principle. Let's see. So another thing about a key idea is a key idea means something that is kind of specific. So sometimes you find talks that are more or less surveys. They tell you a little bit about a lot. These talks seem worthy, but they are always dull. So I call this a sort of broad and shallow, this guy, that's right. And for my money, it's always better to do things that are narrow and deep. So you, as it were, are giving your audience some meat, to change the metaphor, right? Not just sort of superficial stuff. And that means you may need to sort of sink a mine shaft into your paper. Your paper maybe covers more, but instead of covering your whole paper to a uniform shallow depth, pick some aspect and cover it in more depth. Okay, so you can. So I drew the picture kind of like this because you want to give your audience some sense of the territory, or make some claims that the paper will cover this area, but then in your talk you say, I'm going to focus down and just study this particular example or this particular aspect, and I'm going to show you in some detail how that works, and then you're going to have to take my word for it that the paper covers another couple or two or three more things that broaden that mine shaft out to cover more territory. Do you see what I mean? But what's bad is if you cover the whole structure of the paper to uniform depth, because that almost invariably means you leave your audience hungry, right? You leave your audience with only the claims. They have nothing to take away. All they know is, well, he claims this and he claims that, and he's given a tiny bit of detail, but really, there was nothing to bite on, right? So give them some red meat. That make sense? Have you experienced talks like this where you kind of think, oh, well, yes, kind of? I suppose, but the detail really helps. And it's okay at the end to say, and I've seen people do this often in conference talks, and it's quite a good idea, particularly in a conference talk where there's a specific paper that backs it. They may say, if you read the paper, you will find out about X, Y, and Z. And they do that in kind of 60 seconds. So all they're doing is they're giving you a quick menu, and this is at the end of the talk, so they have the intellectual scaffolding to make sense of what they're saying. You say that at the end, you can say, here's what you'll get from the paper, kind of like a contents list for the bits that I missed out from the talk. That can be quite helpful. Okay? So this is what to put in. And this is how to put it in. So when you put it in, what are you going to do for this narrow but deep thing? It's the same as I was explaining for when you're writing a paper. Start with the examples, right? Remember in a paper I said start with the examples and then move on to the generality? In a talk, it's start with the examples and you won't have time for the generality, right? That's pretty much it. Actually, you might hope that if the talk goes well, you know, that you can give your examples and then have room to state a general theorem or sort of be able to at least make more general claims. But partly what I mean by this narrow but deep thing is at least for the example, you can give enough detail to make the audience feel, I understand how that would work. And then your more general claim can be, and it works in a more general situation and you can identify what that is. Okay? So, but if you're short of time, and you will be, the temptation is to leave the examples out. Because how can you deny your audience the glorious, wonder of seeing your general result? But if your audience sees the full glory of your general result and has no clue what it means, communication has failed. It is as if you had never told them. So it's much better to successfully communicate something modest than to unsuccessfully communicate something grand. That's what it comes down to. So here is an example of an example. This is a slide from a talk that I gave really quite a long time ago now. It was about exception handling in a purely functional language. In fact, in a lazy language. Now, you may remember exceptions when you say, throw some exception and it sort of bubbles up the control stack somehow. But in a lazy language, there's no defined order of evaluation. So it's not at all clear where the exception handler would be. And our talk was about how to deal with that. So all I was saying here was making a general remark here. Exceptions have to do with control flow, and lazy languages don't really have control flow in the same way. And then I immediately jumped into an example for solution one. Right? I have a sort of general statement, use data values to carry exceptions. That's a very short general statement, but then rather than try to explain what it means, I just use an illustration, a particular example. And by the way, here, I didn't vocalize this bottom line, right? But it was just a little remark on a slide, a little citation of related work that somebody who knew what they were talking about would say, yeah, that's the right thing to cite. So you can cite related work in your slides, but I would typically not make a meal of it. But this is an example of doing that. Okay? So that's it. Motivation, key idea, supported by examples. If you can do that successfully and convey from your mind to the mind of your audience an intuition for what your main idea is, success. Okay? I'm going to say something about what to leave out, but you're all a bit passive today, so maybe it is the after lunch thing. Comments or observations so far, or questions? Yeah. Never add any formulas. Oh, so I want to say a bit about formalism in a second. So formalism is really important. So and sometimes conveying intuition is aided by formalism. So let me say, I'll come back to formalism in just a moment. Yes, good. It's a good question, because I don't mean say fluffy, vague things the whole time, right? This is saying fluffy, vague things the whole time. This is being specific, concrete, precise about something, right? Yeah, but okay, yeah.
So what do you do when you're sort of combining two different approaches, say sort of biology and computer science, sociology and...
what do you do when you combine the two different approaches, biology and computer science? You mean, so there's a bit more background you have to give?
Yeah, so if you want to get really specific and you kind of focus only on the computer science and not the biology, then you're kind of doing sort of the biology a disservice. So it's not like the synthesis that it might be in your
So
paper.
it's tougher in interdisciplinary fields, isn't it?
Yeah.
To give good talks. That's what it boils down to. But all you have to think is, I have 20 minutes of my audience's attention. How can I make best use of that? Now, maybe in order to understand anything about what your talk is, they need to understand a little bit about the computer science, a little bit about biology, and it might differ depending on the audience. Maybe if you're addressing a computer science audience, you need to tell them more biology and vice versa. I don't have any easy answers for you. Just to say that once you know what your key idea is, you can maybe organize your talk to try to get to that. And it's tough. Some key ideas are easier to scaffold and get to than others. Sorry, no silver bullet. Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes you really have to deal with the fact that your talk is probably only going to be interesting to about 3 members of the audience, because that is really kind of relevant to them, not for them. How would you go about making sure that it's not?
Oh, what if what if your talk really is only relevant for 3 members of the audience? I would resist that assumption, right? Because you have the rest of the audience, right? And they're stuck with you, right? So maybe you should think of your try to think of your talk. Try to think. Okay, so maybe my talk really can't be very much about my paper at all. But the honest truth is, there really are only 3 people who will care. In which case, you might want to frame your talk a bit more broadly that would engage a few more people. And then, halfway through, you sort of zoom in and you say, okay, the rest of you, this stage, if you fall off the wagon, it's fine. I'm just going to... So, in other words, I think it's really a shame on all the other people in the room if you find yourself forced to focus on that very narrow audience very early. Because it loses the medium of a talk, right, to a larger audience. And it may hurt you because the bit you're most excited about is the narrow focus bit, but you kind of owe it to them to give them some cycles of maybe tutorial material. And what's the most interesting thing about the development that's leading to your idea, even if it's not your idea? What's the most fascinating thing that you found on the journey that you would like to share? That might be one way to think of it. Okay, I want to say, yeah.
Talk about the paper you mentioned to avoid stating the obvious, which was, for instance, in your example previously, you said concurrency errors are difficult to spot.
Yeah.
And are not meant to find.
Yeah.
Right.
So
how much should we state this?
No, not very long. So you say this kind of statement. Yeah. You just say is really just positioning your whole work in some territory. So you don't want to, you want to say, we all know, guys, that concurrent programs are really hard to write and that bugs are extremely difficult to discover because they're so irreproducible, right? That's it. It took you 10 seconds to say that, but you positioned yourself. But if you take another 3 minutes to say that, that's bad, right? Because everybody's thinking, I know that, get on with it, right? So a very quick positioning, but then immediately focus on the bit that you're after. So you're sort of zooming in. It's like Google Earth, right? The bit that when you go from seeing the whole Earth to sort of zooming in on, where do you live? France. So zooming in on Paris, right? That orientation bit's quite helpful, right? If you just see Paris close up, you think, well, where am I, right? So that's what. Yeah, good question. Let me tell you something not to put in that people often do. The first thing is the outline of your talk. How many talks have you seen like this? They start off the very first slide. It's the outline of your talk. Oh, and then moreover, even worse, they don't just put up the slide. They read through it, kind of line by line. I'm going to tell you about synthetic epimorphisms, and then because that seems obscure, they can't bear not to say, another 20 seconds work about what synthetic epimorphisms are, which nobody understands at this stage. And everybody's going to sleep. This is, remember, your first 90 seconds, and you're burning that hallowed ground on the table of contents, which nobody understands. It's like that section about the structure of my paper is as follows. Same thing, yes?
Many times after a talk, the slides are posted online, at which case it may be nice to have a table of contents to show.
That might not be a bad idea.
This is what's going to be discussed. All right, I'll maybe skip ahead to here, or maybe I'm not going to read it at all. As opposed to having to go through all the slides to see
right. So let's see. You're saying you might want to put one of these slides into an online version, not what you present, but what you post later.
Yeah, or maybe you would just skip over that one.
Yeah. Yeah, or hide it. Well, don't skip it, just hide it. You know, so it doesn't appear at all. Don't distract your audience if you possibly can. No distractions. But not having an outline doesn't mean no signposts. So here, I've been giving periodic sort of orientation things that say I'm sort of shifting gears now to a sort of new section. That's quite helpful. Sometimes people have a kind of a table of contents with a kind of, and they put a signpost slide like this with the whole table of contents with, you know, highlighting the one that they're up to now. That can be quite helpful. So quick signposts to help orient your audience as you go through, that's fine. Just don't spend your first 90 seconds on it. That's all. And never pause for very long. Yeah?
What is the difference with the slide where you tell them, this is what you get if you listen to my talk?
Well, because you're concentrating. So the question is, what's the difference between a table of contents and the bit that I said you should do, which is why you should listen to the talk? Right? Well, provided you're orienting what you're presenting there around, this is why you should listen to the talk, that's fine. Right? But this is not oriented. It's simply a table of contents. It's a bit like, what's the difference between the structure of this paper is as follows, section 1 is about that, and the contributions are blah. Right? So it's all, the difference is what your intent for this slide is. If this is the best way to explain why an uninformed audience should listen to the talk, go for it. That's your goal. What is the best way to explain to your audience in the first 90 seconds why they should listen? If that's it, fine. Yeah.
I saw one version of creating slides in which this outline slide is something like slide number 6 or 7. So you have the title,
yes.
You describe the problem and your key idea, and then you jump to this one and say, well, we already discussed about the background, this is what it's going to be next.
That is way better. It's much better to do your intro first, I've got people engaged, and then start giving signposts. But even once you do give that signpost, you know, a whole slide with content, don't spend long on it, like, you know, 10 seconds or something, or 15 seconds, just to say, you know, now we're kind of at about here, you know, we're about a third of the way through, we've done a bit of background, now I'm going to show you a bit of this. But don't look through all the ones you're about to do, but haven't got to. Don't even mention them. So go no further than where you've got to when you're explaining that. But that's fine, yeah. Sometimes people put it up in very tiny font at the beginning, and but what you should not do, let me tell you one thing not to do. Do you know at the bottom, sometimes people have slides that say 3, you know, slide 3. And sometimes that can be quite helpful because then an audience later can say, on slide 12, you know, you had something I didn't understand. That can be, but sometimes it says slide 3 out of 52. And that's terrible because the audience are thinking, we're 30% into the talk, we're 10% into the slides, and they start doing this calculation constantly. Will he ever finish, right? 52 slides, oh my goodness me, you know. So it becomes a great preoccupation for your audience. Please don't do that. Right? Never ever give the number of slides, because you're going to cut them if you run out of time. Yeah?
I kind of tend to disagree with both the numbering and the outline slides. So I mean, it's okay, definitely we should not abuse outline slides and we should not have bad outline slides. But if we engineer the outline slide to be a nice one, and actually it can be a nice progress bar to show it every now and then, right? So, and I think it's more polite to your audience to actually know where your talk, when your talk is going to end.
So, like I said, signpost, good. So, progress bar, good.
Yes. So, if I just see the outline slide, then actually, you know, if I'm not really interested into your evaluation section or the details of your design, I may just log out and, you know, do my.
That's fine. But I think the main thing I'm saying is not never show anything like this, but do not stop here in your first 90 seconds and spend time talking about it. That's the point. I've been to talks when we've been 5 minutes in, before we've left this stuff, I'm completely lost. It happens. That's the main thing. Do offer signposts in whatever way seems best to you.
I agree that we should put the outline slide where, you know, at the moment where our audience has the full attention, you know, is in our presentation.
Yeah.
While when the attention is, you know, like not that good, we then bring the outline slide to basically,
That's
you know,
right, yeah.
now I'm going to switch to something new.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, go.
So I think one of the things that you might be missing here is that your time is really precious in a conference talk. This talk so far has been 50% longer than a typical conference talk. You spend 30 seconds or a minute on your outline.
You actually don't.
And
if you have a good outline slide,
you've lost it. And something like this, even if you spend 10 seconds on it, people are trying to read it. Don't put anything on the slides that people don't have time to read while they're listening to you.
Exactly. That's why this would be a bad outline slide.
Okay, fine. So I think we're agreeing furiously. Right? Progress bar, good. Not in much detail, and do not pause and spend a lot of time because your time is precious. You have, 20 minutes. That's not long. If you spend 1 minute, anyway, enough said. Okay. Right. Another thing not to put in is a slide about related work. We talked about this in the, for papers, we said put related work at the end. For a talk, a conference talk, I would probably not put a related work slide at all, right? Mainly because for most of the audience, it won't make any sense. Right, your audience is broad at this point, and it's not helpful. That's, again, like in a paper, that's not the same as saying you should not acknowledge related work. So as you go through, you just mention, in passing or on the slide, like I did in an earlier one, just mentions and stuff, and if in response to a question, then you must absolutely know your stuff. So if somebody says, but what about, green and black, you say, yeah, that was fantastic, and it relates to us in the following way. So your responses to questions must be articulate and, and supportive. But I don't think it's worth spending, again, with your precious 20 minutes, a long time going through this. Okay, that is for the paper. Yeah.
They use related work as a motivation. So you say this is what exists now.
Yeah.
But it's missing this, and we overcome these issues.
So the observation is that some people can use related work as a motivational slide and say we start from here, and but these guys can do this, this, and this, but there's a missing piece, and we're going to add that. So that's fine if the goal is that is the shortest path to motivating your audience. So the goal is motivate your audience and get them to understand the problem and where the gap is. The goal is not to make sure that you have mentioned X, Y, and Z. See what I mean? That's the point. The next thing that you must not put in is too much technical detail, right? So you've seen talks like this. What are we leaving out? Outline slides, related work, and lots of technical detail. So this speaks to your question about formalism. If you put up a slide like this, you can see the audience going, they sort of go, ugh. Right, and so just a few of them will go, aha, now we see the meat. But they are vanishingly rare, vanishingly rare. Most of the audience will slump in their seats when they see this. No, so nevertheless, some of this may be very interesting. If I have something like this, I actually might put up a slide like this at some point to say, look, the whole type system fits on one slide. I'm not expecting you to read this at all. I just want you to get a sense that it's not that big. You find the details in the paper. And then I might do that after I've shown. So I might pick one of these rules, right? Perhaps this one, and I might sort of blow it up to full screen and talk through that rule in detail. So I do something in detail, and then a whole lot of other stuff I don't have time for. Right? So the formalism is important in computer science. Computer science has tons of really good, insightful formalism behind it. But I would be selective about present one bit of formalism, thoroughly, as it were, and then say, and there's a whole lot more that you can read in the paper. Well, that would be my approach. But it's awfully easy to do this. Why is it awfully easy to do this? Because every one of these typing judgment rules is drenched in your blood. It's the same as with the paper stuff, like the blind alleys I was telling you about. This isn't the blind alley, but nevertheless, it took you a lot of work to get to that point, and you are reluctant not to share with your audience how wonderful it all is. And yet it's counterproductive to do so. Right? So present specific aspects by all means, and do have some more as a backup slide. So sometimes you'll get questions from your audience that are kind of a technical nature, and it's quite helpful to be able to flick to a slide, say, here's the whole system, and yes, this is the typing rule that I'd refer you to in the paper, as it were. So it's quite as a backup slide. But it's a terrible temptation to present too much technical detail. Okay? So much for what to leave out. So I want to say a little bit about presentation stuff, right? So we had a bit about what to put in, a bit about what to leave out, now about just physically getting on and presenting it. Well, so this is another slide to remember nothing else from this talk. You've got to remember this, right? That when you are presenting your ideas to an audience, your principal mechanism during your presentation for making them receptive to your ideas is to appear enthusiastic. Now, the great thing is, you probably are enthusiastic. After all, you spent a good fraction of your last few months or years working on this thing, and so unless you're exhausted, you'll probably think, yes, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you've got to share that sense with your audience. So I can't tell you how important this is, because it kind of it dramatically increases your audience's receptiveness. It's like flowers. You know those pictures of sort of sunflowers? They sort of droop at night. And when the sun comes out, the flowers sort of go like this and they kind of open up. Or you can, if you sit at the front and look at an audience when somebody else is speaking, you can almost see the flowers opening up when the speaker appears to be excited and engaged with what they're speaking about. And you can see them droop and retreat into their laptops when the speaker appears to be, deeply unenthusiastic about their topic and says, well, conveys the impression, well, I'm not very interested in this, and almost certainly you aren't very interested in it, but here I am anyway, so I suppose I'll tell you about it. Subliminally, people never say that, but subliminally they can convey that impression. And another big thing, of course, is that if you appearing enthusiastic is often to do with sort of physical moving around. And I think you talked about this this morning, about sort of presentation styles. But actually, I find that the business about moving around, not being stuck at a podium somewhere, is very helpful for making me feel more relaxed as a speaker. So I encourage you to do it. And I know this is a personal thing, right? Some people find it very much more difficult to kind of exude the enthusiasm because they're just naturally more kind of understated people. Now, I'm a sort of, a congenital exhibitionist, so it's easy for me to seem enthusiastic, but I just have to beg you that even if you're a very, very modest person who is typically very quiet, you have to kind of just train yourself somehow that for these 20 minutes, you are going to make everybody believe that this is the most important thing in your life and convey that sense to them. It's really, that's the biggest thing you can do to make them receptive to your message. Of course, you have to have a message too, right? But it's no good if they're not receptive to it, so you need both. Okay? That's it. This is the big thing. And if you're not enthusiastic, you cannot expect them to be. Okay. The next thing about presenting the talk is be familiar with it, right? So I've written, write your slides the night before. And indeed, I used to quite often write my slides more or less the night before, at least polish them up. And this was in the days when we wrote on acetates, and you present them on an overhead projector. So they were physical objects. Now it's even easier, right? You can sit in the talk before, you can still be modifying your slides, right? But the important thing is that when you're presenting your talk, you want to know exactly what's going on. You don't want to be, so I'm being bad today, right? I have a couple of times I've sort of gone past where I intended. I had to look to check what my next slide was about. That's very, very bad, right? You shouldn't do that. You should be so familiar with your talk by the time you present it that you know what's coming next, and you don't do any sort of forward and back stuff. That make sense? And you can set your computer to show the next slide and cues like that. But the important thing is that the audience should not know. It should appear seamless because you are deeply familiar with the exact order that you've chosen to present. Okay. And actually, I think it's quite cool if you can put in a few references in your talk, a reference or two to a talk that was earlier that day. Kind of cool. Shows you were listening. Okay. So. Another thing that people often do at the beginning of their talk is they make an apology of some kind. They say, I'm a mere worm, I don't feel very well qualified to address this audience, or, my computer broke last night, so I haven't got all the results that I was hoping to give you, or my flight was late, or my son died. Somebody actually gave a talk like that. He said, my son died, so I'm sorry I'm late. Everybody's thinking, blimey, why are you here at all? Your son's dead. This is in the days when Sun Computer made workstations, and he meant that his workstation had fallen over. So it was okay. But the important thing about this is don't apologize because your audience is deeply uninterested in your shortcomings. They're just not that interested in you. They're interested in what you have to offer them. So it's just a waste of time. And it sort of sets you off on the wrong foot. Just remorselessly remove all apology. Okay? Even if it's richly deserved, you should nevertheless remove it. Now, next thing about things, there you are sitting in the front row, right, and your previous speaker is going, and they seem to be fully confident, enthusiastic, the audience is engaged, and you're sitting there thinking, I'm not sure I can actually stand up, right, because your legs are doing that wobbly thing, and you're breathing a bit fast, and actually it seems in serious doubt whether you'll be physically able to stand up. I have felt like this on numerous occasions. In fact, I can tell you from experience that it's very rare to be unable to physically stand up. It merely feels like that. So you can normally do it. But nevertheless, there is this moment at the beginning of a talk at which things are a bit, the moment at which the person is introduced to you, their eyes swivel to you, you know you've got that 120 seconds, and like sort of, the headlights finally focus on the rabbit, and then what's going to happen? So my suggestion would be to script that first little intro, right? So I hate it when you, if at all possible, do not read your talk, right? Everybody knows this. It's bad if you're just sitting there reading your talk. But for the first 90 seconds or so, you may want to actually, in advance, write out your exact words and learn them. Right? Partly because this is the hallowed ground, right? So it's important to work on that, but also because if you know what to say then it's like sort of getting the aircraft launched off the runway. If you can just get going, then you'll be fine. But if you sort of stumble in that beginning bit, it can be awfully discomforting for your audience as well as you, actually. So just try scripting that first little bit, but try not to script the whole talk if you can possibly avoid it. Okay? And don't worry about it, right? Everybody feels like this. Everybody feels like this. The previous speaker felt like this before they started. All I can say is it gets a little bit better with time, not all that much, but a little bit better, and it certainly gets better during the talk. So if you are, so enthusiastic about what you're explaining, soon you're sort of lost in the subject, and you kind of lose your fear of your audience because you think, oh, it's so wonderful. Right? So try to cultivate that. Okay? Now, Dave will have talked about being seen and heard. So I'm probably going to reiterate a couple of things about that, but just speak to the back, right? So I'm wearing a microphone, but I think I would be audible at the back even if I wasn't. And that's a good baseline sort of hypothesis to use. Pretend that you haven't got a microphone. He will have talked about making eye contact. That's very important, and you're being very good with me about making eye contact. Spotting somebody in the audience who is nodding. Right. So my friend here, what is your name? Evita. Evita. Say it loudly so everyone can hear. All right, there you are. Sorry, I'm unable to pronounce your name. But you're very good at nodding at me, and this is so nice, right? So sometimes you find a member of the audience who is engaged enough, they just sort of, every now and again, they'll just kind of do this, and that's kind of somewhat unconscious. In your case, I know it's somewhat conscious. You're trying to be encouraging. That's very nice of you, right? So, but often you'll find somebody in the audience who does that, and you can make eye contact with them, and kind of, because you're forming a little bit of rapport with them. But you must, and don't just make eye contact with the same person all the time, because otherwise they begin to feel a bit like a rabbit in the headlights, right? It can be quite encouraging, I think, to find somebody who's good at that, and watch your audience for questions. So sometimes you can get so wrapped up in your talk that you forget to look for questions. Now, in some talk formats, like conferences, it can be difficult to take questions during the talk, but in many settings it's fine, and indeed it's a really very good idea, as I want to say next. So questions are the most valuable thing you can get in a talk. When you get questions, you know that you are succeeding. All right? Not you are failing to communicate. You are succeeding in communicating because someone hasn't felt engaged enough to start a dialogue with you about what's going on. Right? And so if you respond to a question by sort of doing a brush off and giving the impression that you have, your plan for the talk, we're marching down the plan, and please don't distract me because it's my talk, right? Then who wants to listen to a talk like that, right? You want to say, this is our talk. This is our chance for a little dialogue. So it's fantastic if you can then, not only encourage questions, but respond to them positively. Say, that's a great question, in a sort of non-dismissive kind of way. respond to it, and then maybe ask if there are any others. And sometimes that will mean that your talk gets a bit off the rails. You don't quite have enough time. Conference format, you don't tend to get questions in the middle, so then you know what you're doing. But for a seminar, you might have to. But if that happens, that is a good thing. If you had so many questions that you're unable to finish your talk, that's probably good. At some point, you may have to say, actually, we really haven't got to the good bit yet. So I love your questions, but I really want to get to, please let me get to the good bit. That's okay, right? Because the audience also wants the good bits. But you can truncate the end. Okay? So it's much, much better to have a well-engaged audience that is excited and engaged with you than, but not reach the end of your talk, than to have a disengaged one, but you've presented everything to them. But what happened? They all just went away. All right? So let's see. I put this in after just recently about being the reverse side of being a good audience member, right? So be one of those people who nod and do ask questions. And I put this bit about asking questions because, in fact, at Microsoft, I'm one of the people who asked a lot of questions. And people often say to me, I'm really glad you asked that question. I sit there and immediately, at the moment I start to lose contact, I start asking questions. And that's often fairly early in the talk. And so sometimes the speaker will give me the strong impression they don't want to hear from me anymore. And then probably I'll close down and start reading my email. Sometimes they'll respond, but I feel that I'm beginning to get to the point where I'm derailing their whole talk, right? And there's another segment of the audience that really knows a lot more about the subject that I'm going to mess up. So I kind of, I'll stop asking questions then, because I go to a lot of talks that aren't in my exact area. But I really urge you to take the responsibility on yourself in a talk, not to wait for the speaker to ask for questions, but to proactively ask questions and to start doing so early, right? And then sort of respond to how the speaker then responds to you. Yeah?
You can also do that during a 20 minutes?
In a 20-minute conference talk, no, you can't do that, right? Because the sort of conference format is so set down, at least in my field, right? It goes 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, and everybody's scripted their talks pretty precisely, so the format is an uninterrupted presentation followed by questions. But in any kind of departmental seminar kind of situation with a group of 20 or 30 people, absolutely. And sometimes in larger groups like this is a larger group, or maybe even at a bigger conference, yes. Yeah?
Have you got any good strategies for dealing with abusive critics?
Oh, the abusive. So people always ask this, what about people who are either awkward, nasty, or completely, what's the word, they will not let go? First line of attack, first line of defense is you sort of try to respond constructively to begin with. And then you say, I'm really happy to talk to you about this line of questioning, but if I follow it much further, we won't have time to get to the main point of the talk, and I'd really like to talk to you afterwards, right? If that fails, then you have to start looking beggingly at your chair, right? Because there should be somebody hosting your talk, right? You kind of say, help me out here. It's pretty rare if you've sort of shut them down with, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. So don't put up with letting your talk be derailed, right? You must not do that, but because it is your talk. You're kind of taking responsibility for conveying the key message to your audience. So you don't want to let all that be sent out of the window. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
One thing about the not frequent thing, when I was presenting, defending my master's thesis, I had identified another, and this nodder completely derailed me because I was very happy to be able to look at this person, but then suddenly I was telling the most important bit, and their face contorted into this extremely confused face.
Well, how helpful! You can maybe you can say then, maybe at this point some of you are getting a little confused, and I've lost you. Would somebody like to ask a question?
Yeah.
That's great. When the nodder stops nodding, assuming they're not just going to sleep, right? Sometimes the nodders are simply dozing off. You have to be careful of that. But when they stop nodding, that can be a clue that something's going wrong, and then you can really stop and ask. You don't ask them personally, right? You say, I have a sort of sense here that maybe I'm losing touch with you, right? You plural. That's fine, yeah. What do I want to say? How much do I want to say? Not very much. So I've got 4 minutes to say 3 things. Just about slide presentations, so more that you've done with Dave. Make sure you use one of these. They're tremendously liberating because they allow you to move around, so you can change slides. And make sure they don't have too many buttons, right? Some of them have dozens of buttons, and it's easy to press the wrong one, and the screen turns upside down and goes green. You want ones that have forward and back. That's it. And bring backups of everything. So always assume that your laptop will have broken by the time you are presenting, and always make sure that it's going to connect to the projector before your talk. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in this embarrassed moment at the beginning of a talk at which somebody's fiddling with the projector. You've got to be there in advance, and if you're following somebody else, go there before the session and make sure it works. It will still break, but nevertheless, at least you tried. 2 things about slides and then I'm finished. Please don't do this. I hate this. Right? The people do this and it's as if they're telling me as an audience member, I don't really trust you to listen to me if I show you everything I'm going to tell you on one slide. So they show it one bit at a time. For me, that grates. This is a personal thing. But I find that a very distracting presentation technique. I'd rather just showed me the whole thing. Just occasionally, there's something you want to reveal, right? Like that's happened a couple of times on slides where I've had a little gap and I've put something else up, but didn't do it very much. Right? So that's just my advice to you. Take it or leave it. But the one point at a time, I don't go with it at all. And oh my goodness, that's something very weird. That's right. And I'm sure Dave told you this. Don't know. I just don't use animations at all, except if I'm doing something like I'm animating an algorithm to showing how the pointers are moving one at a time or something like that. But never for, well, personally, never for just, PowerPoint can do this. Isn't it cool? All right. And the last thing, it being 3:58 exactly, is you've got to stop on time. So this applies at conference talks. You'll be your conference chair will almost certainly cut you off if you go on too long. In departmental seminars or more informal situations, it's a little bit harder for whoever's running the talk to say it's time to stop now, and they may start to gesticulate a little bit. But it's very impolite to your audience to carry on past the time in which they believe the talk finishes, and it's also ineffective. Because what happens is that you get to the point where they think that the talk is going to be finished, and it's not. And they start thinking, what's about this next appointment that I was going to, or isn't this next talk going to start? They stop listening. They become dramatically less receptive at the appointed time. So it's ineffective to carry on, and it's rude. And the worst of all is the speaker who says he's gone on for an hour. It's now 3 o'clock, and they go to they look at the chair and say they're visiting from some very important university. And they say, Scarlett, I've just got another 10 slides, and they're really good. Shall I go on? And what's the poor, local chair to do, the host to do? So the rest of the audience is going, absolutely not, Scarlett. But Scarlett sort of goes, oh yes, that would be fine. Thank you. We'd love that. Just don't do this, right? Say it's 3 o'clock. You may have to sort of skip something to get to bits that you really wanted to do before you finish, but you must finish on time. Now, if at that point, the audience proactively says, we're desperate to hear more, then they're fine, right? Or they ask a lot of questions. They ask questions. Once you're into question time, then you're in the hands of the session chair. Again, this is an informal situation. You can say, I'm in your hands now. We'll stop whenever you like, but I'm happy to answer questions for as long as you care to go on. That's fine, right? And then the onus is not on you. So, okay? So this is very, very important. Finish on time. And we have, right? So I'm just going to leave you with the sort of thumbnail summary. Okay,
Thank you
good.
very much,
Right.
Thanks, Simon. I think it fitted in very well with what Dave, who's at the back there observing us, discussed this morning. We will have time for just a couple of questions now. Anything else people want to observe?
Something that was sort of implicit in your talk, but you didn't really cover in any detail. Do you have any hints or suggestions on ways of preparing the talk? So one way is to write a script or to write the slides, or there's some sort of magic that you need to come up with to have those 20 minutes worth of things to say. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Do you mean about how to develop your sort of... one thing you can do is kind of give practice presentations to other people. That's really useful. But I think you meant even before that, how do you come up with your storyline, as it were? Was that what you meant? Yeah. Yes. How do you come up with a storyline in the first place? Well, I suppose, again, I keep feeling as if I wax repetitive, but it's because it's important. I imagine I'm speaking to somebody with a whiteboard. Just my friend. How would I tell them something about, well, you know, I've got them for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, what would I tell them? And then, of course, then I might refine that in the light of trying it out. But I don't think I can do any better than that. And that might be a selective path through your paper. That's the important thing. But then it is worth trying it out, of course. So, you know, if you're giving a talk, do try it out on your friends. Try it out, you know, in person, particularly if you've got very limited slot. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just give you a micro. And then we have one question over there, and then finish.
Hi. Thanks again for another really great presentation. I did enjoy this morning's presentation and this one, but I do have a concern. So I have a background in film, and in film, for example, there's a very famous protocol for writing scripts. That's called the Fritz Lang one. That tells you exactly a recipe for a successful script. And it's very similar to what we've heard today in terms of having like a recipe to convey a message. So Fritz Lang would tell you in the minute, 1 page equals a minute in film, right? So it tell you in the page 13, there comes the first situation for the point that would change the story, right? And it tells you exactly like that. And most of the Hollywood films that you'll watch respect the Fritz Lang structure. What happens is that viewers are used to that, so this research shows that you expect that to happen, and if it doesn't happen, you get a bit stressed. But it also allows you to kind of like lose the magic of expecting the moment when something different is going to happen. So for that reason, a lot of really creative film directors will use their own script that is totally different to create different types of sensations. So I see that something really similar is happening to TED Talks. In the beginning, we were all like, oh, this is not really nice. And now we're kind of used to, oh, now comes the joke. Now comes the kind of weird moment. So where do you think is the limit between having a really good recipe that works and being extremely creative and making something that's different and that will make people be interested in what you say just because you did it in such a different way?
Oh, well, I don't know. You are way ahead of me. Right? You actually know something about, you know, communicating with people, right? Whereas I don't. So.
You're amazing, Lina. You could tell me anything.
I'm not this part. I don't agree with, right? So I think that anybody who is truly enthusiastic about their subject can allow that enthusiasm to escape them, right? And so I would love to know how to take your, your knowledge about how films work and apply it to research talks. But that's kind of an interesting question. You maybe try it out on a few people, see if it works. So I think from a kind of professional communication point of view, I'm way behind you. I just have this sort of single, sort of one bit worth it, which is that have an idea and share it with enthusiasm. Everything else is subordinate to that, and maybe you can help do a better job about the how to share it stuff. As you will see, Dave will tell you my slides are completely naff from a slidey point of view. I mean, Comic Sans, where is it?
Yeah. I just wanted to add something to the question about how to prepare slides, or just tell how I do it. I don't know whether it's good. Maybe you can tell that.
Yeah.
So I normally just print out my paper and just read it carefully and just mark everything that I want to tell people in my talk. And then I have a sort of idea what I want to tell them. And then I just take slides and put like really more or less I copy the sentences from the paper and just put them in the slides to get a feeling for how long that is and what order to take. And then I have a basic structure. And then I really go through the talk slide by slide, thinking of how do I want to tell them? Do I want to leave the sentence? Do I want to put a picture in? So what is best to represent that? I don't know whether that's a good technique, but that helped me a lot to do my slides. So maybe.
Good. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that. So what I suggest to do is basically come up with some very, short story, but create a set of slides, empty slides, just with titles and punchlines, saying this is what this slide is going to say, and this is the takeaway message, right? And then once you have a story, you can easily fill in the gaps.
That's good. Thanks.
Okay, I think we'll finish the question session now.
Great.
And thank you very much, Simon, for another
great.
Great.
Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.